Well, living in coastal Mississippi, hurricanes are a fabric of who we are, and don't necessarily get totally used to it, but it's part of the expectation. So you have to plan in advance. Probably the most defining event we've had in the last decade was Hurricane Katrina. Although we've had coastal flooding before, it was most severe in that particular calamity. And so we had to pull together as a community. Probably the best result of it is in the aftermath of the storm was how we had a lot of assistance from the faith community, from folks all around the country, from the federal and the state level as well. So really it was, we learned how to invent things on the fly, how to respond, how to rebuild, how to clean up, and what your priorities were. And we lost our collective physical history there. A lot of the buildings were at the century mark and they're gone, as were the documents and artifacts. But put in stark perspective, stuff was just stuff. And I think we realized that if we could put our hands on our children, our family, our loved ones, get people back to some sense of new normal, we could. Part of that was getting the kids back in school, another was getting people back to work. So those were two major focal points for us as far as rebuilding. And then of course came the physical rebuild. You had to get things out of the way, but because of the federal funds that we received to a great degree and insurance monies, we made it a priority to rebuild in a mitigated fashion, where anything was built in close proximity to where the floodwaters did come, they would be hardened against future storms, future onslaughts. So it was a learning process, and I think we're still having lessons that we're putting together as we prepare down the road. But we did learn one thing, that as bad as it was, it could always be worse. And so we need to make sure we prepare in advance, because we missed some opportunities based on an expectation that the worst storm before was Camille. That was a standard by what everything was defined by. And we figured if it wasn't damaged in Camille, it wasn't going to get hurt. And that probably taught us as big a lesson as anything. You hope for the best, but expect the worst. The hurricane component overrides everything. You have your tides that are seasonal. Winter tides are very low. Summer tides are typically high. When things coincide with the full moon, other effects you will see some. But this term nuisance flooding, we have not had any type of flooding is bad, particularly if you've experienced it personally. But where we're seeing floods occur are with unusual rain events that maybe have a 100-year event in that range. So they're not commonplace, but they do occur. And when you do, the key there is making sure your infrastructure is prepared to be able to handle that. And so that's an ongoing learning process. We're taking some monies that are remaining or that we've had obligated to us to de-snag our creeks and tributaries and make sure that our sewer mains are in place. We also, if we ever have the chance again, with the federal relief funds, that we will have more input as to what needs to be replaced, what needs to be built new, those sorts of things. Unfortunately, we built a lot of treatment plants and whatnot north of the immediate coast, thinking the population would move up. But it's so convenient and so nice being near the coastline. People will always, I think, generationally stay close to coastlines no matter what comes. And so we need to understand that. Had we had it to do over again, we probably would have been more emphatic about replacing existing antiquated plants as opposed to building new ones that in many respects nobody's tied up to right now, 10 years later. There's never enough money. So I think conferences like this help bring it to bear. It lets us have the interaction we need with some of the folks who are making decisions at the federal level in particular. It was stated today that there's always a sense of urgency at the local level. And while the folks at the federal level are sensitive and responsive, because the process is so cumbersome, the more we can partner with in advance of these calamities happen, the more we can find ways to mitigate more effectively. I think when the storm does come, and with other natural disasters as well, we can be better prepared. I'm hoping that this conversation launches into looking at a larger scale response on the federal level, not just on flooding, not just on coastal flooding. But we're having places in America flood that have never had water problems before. When that earthquake comes on the West Coast or wherever it occurs, or the one that backs up the Mississippi River again, we're always going to have something. Everybody's got something. And so we probably need to have a serious discussion about a federal template, a better framework on how to fund it, as opposed to just scooping tens of millions of dollars out of the treasury every time something happens, to actually have a backstop and a plan, probably with an insurance component, that will allow for quicker response, eliminate a lot of unnecessary lawsuits, and get people back on their feet quicker. Well, it's refreshing to be here to hear different perspectives on what other communities are seeing, because not everybody's experience is the same. But somebody's always learned one or two things that maybe you can apply or avoid in your own community in dealing with this. But I do think with all that we have on our plate, there are a lot of things that demand our attention as public officials. And so as critical as coastal flooding is, I think it is necessary to have meetings like this so we can refocus and maybe retool and reach out. I've already contacted this is a Saturday, but I've already contacted my staffers, asked them about certain components of things we may either be utilizing or could take advantage of, or just be aware of down the road. So I think they're very important for us to refocus. No, I think the one thing that probably bears discussing down the road is that larger federal component on how we prepare for natural disasters, regardless of the nature of them, whether it's flooding, whether it's wildfire, tornadoes, those mudslides, earthquakes. I really do think there's a bigger component in question. And what I was talking about on the lawsuit side of it, sometimes you have a policy that covers one risk here and another here. Sometimes there's a combined set of damage, and then you get the companies arguing over who's going to cover what. If we had a better umbrella approach, then the consumer doesn't get hurt in this back and forth. They just get taken care of. So I really think that bears a broader discussion and hopefully an implementation of a federal policy.